The question is, are hackers a threat to the public infrastructure? That's something we're going to be asking our next guest, Jonathan Pollet, who's the founder of Red Tiger Security. And he's unveiling a new attacks that we should be out on the lookout for, because he has more information as to where these guys are, spearheading their efforts and how they're going about doing their business. Jonathan, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Uma.
Let's talk for a moment about whether or not you first believe if there are hackers in and of themselves are a real threat to our entire infrastructure here in the U.S.
Well, thanks. Yes, we've been studying these types of cybersecurity threats against SCADA and national critical infrastructure assets for about 10 years. And over the past 2 to 3 years, we've seen an exponential increase in the focused effort directed at specific critical infrastructure sectors, such as electric power, oil and gas, energy companies. And the threat is real. We're seeing that just in the news recently with the latest release of Dooku, which is another variant of the Stuxnet virus, to allow people to extract information such as blueprints, how plants operate, specifics about these equipment that would allow them later to carve up a specific exploit to take advantage of those systems. And it's a real big threat.
Stuxnet, as you mentioned, happened about a year ago, and that actually raised alarms about security threats to our nation's power grids and power plants, water treatment sites. I think initially people were not as concerned about the possibility of this happening, but once this worm actually was off and running, people took it more seriously.
Yes, exactly. About 4 or 5 years ago, when we were doing assessments of power plants and transmission grid systems, energy control centers, our clients would take our advice a little bit flippantly. They wouldn't take directed action at correcting the flaws in their systems, putting in firewalls, putting in intrusion detection systems, and protecting the infrastructure. But after the latest threats since Stuxnet and Night Dragon and all the latest threats we've seen in the news over the past year, we find a lot of our critical infrastructure clients in the power sector, oil and gas sector, energy sector finally realized that this is a real threat, and they needed, just like they need surveillance on their physical systems, badge access to protect physical access into their systems, they also need to have digital protection to protect access through the networks. So it's been a good wake-up call.
It's a wake-up call, but yet I've interviewed different guests along the way who say, for example, our own government is not taking the steps that really are needed to safeguard sensitive files, sensitive systems in a big way. They have to a certain extent, but not to the satisfaction of those like yourselves who are experts on what these cyber threats can do. For example, talk to me about our government, for example. How vulnerable is our government at this time to a major cyber breach?
All right, well, that's a pretty broad question, but I think it depends on the industry sector or vertical. And the problem is that the attackers are evolving their attacks faster than our own best practices and regulations are put in place. For example, if you look at the NERC CIP standards for electric power plants, it took several years for them to finally say this is the set of standards and controls you should have in place to protect the power plant. That was written 3 years ago. These attacks are being evolved on the fly. So it's a constant problem of telling people how much security they should have in place versus, and then the attackers learning about that and taking advantage of it. So it's going to be a constant problem.
So nothing ever really stays as it was. Let's say once the attack has happened, it can certainly morph into something else when, let's say, you find out about it, and by that time it's too late because the hackers are going to move and evolve that threat into something else. Correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes. The latest threats have the ability to update themselves over the internet through command and control servers. So once the rootkit comes into the network, it's not a static threat. It actually can be updated remotely. So it's a constant struggle to root the malware out of the system and keep protecting the perimeter and deploying additional technologies such as whitelisting to an application control to basically prevent malware from running on the inside.
Well, let me ask you this then. In terms of tackling this, is the best way to go at this state to state, city by city, to some of the power plants, to the electrical grids, to the water treatment sites? I mean, how best do you what's the best way, I guess, do we address this and go at this in a way where it makes sense and is effective?
Yes, good question. We've been participating in a lot of outreach to our clients into various sectors, and we participate in about 3 or 4 events a month. In fact, right now I'm in Miami because I'm at the Halted conference here in Miami, and so we present a lot of information back to the community at large to let them know about these threats. Because what we feel is that
but ultimately, who's responsible? Ultimately, who does the responsibility go to when you're talking about a community's electrical system, a city like Miami, for example? If you're taking a look at the city's electrical grid, or a power station that's nearby, or a nuclear power plant, who's ultimately responsible for safeguarding this system so that hackers are not able to penetrate and cause big problems?
Well, a lot of the critical infrastructure in the U.S. is privatized, so it's private businesses. It's the local power company, and they have the responsibility to make sure that their systems are secure. There's standards and regulations now that requires them to do specific things, such as put in firewalls, put in intrusion detection, review their logs. But many say that these regulations from the government aren't stiff enough. They're not required to do enough things to secure the system. So whereby a power company could say, yes, I'm fully compliant with the NERC regulations, attackers also know what those regulations are, and they can evolve threats that take advantage of that. So,
exactly as you put
it.
Exactly as you put it, because as you say, they update themselves. These threats are updated constantly.
Yes, exactly. But the ultimate responsibility is on the shoulders of the local power companies, and fortunately, with a lot of the regulations that have come out within the last couple of years, they have spent the required money to protect themselves. But some say not enough.
Do you foresee more attacks in the future against the power companies, nuclear power sites? I mean, what is it you're telling folks right now to be really watchful for and to really incorporate upgrades to systems across the board?
Yes, this is just the beginning. We've been looking at this for 10 years, and it's been a sharp increase in the research work being done to discover vulnerabilities in SCADA systems and industrial control systems. So it's just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's many more to come after this. So if people are just now starting to wake up and think, wow, maybe I should do something about that 15-year-old control system that's running my plant. Maybe I should put in some firewalls. Maybe I should put in whitelisting and lock down my servers and workstations and patch them, keep them up to date. It's a little bit too late. I think this is just the start of many more that will come after this.
Do you have any alerts to tell us more about today in terms of things that you guys are finding out about, where we need to be more careful?
Well, the way these threats are coming in is from the inside. Someone on the inside of the network is clicking on an attachment they shouldn't click on. They're going to a website they shouldn't go to, or they're clicking on an instant message from a friend that they thought it was a friend, but actually was a link to a different website. And it's allowing this malware to come into the system from the corporate IT side, from their corporate desktop. And then it's moving through the corporate network, eventually finding itself in the control rooms of these power plants and refineries and oil and gas systems. So locking down that perimeter between the corporate network and these industrial systems is really where a lot of focus can be applied.
So it's your belief then this can really bring down the infrastructure of states, of communities, even our own government. I mean, it's a very real possibility.
Yeah, sure, definitely. We know that the attackers have the capabilities to extract information, to learn about our systems, and then to craft specific attacks to take down parts of the system. I don't know if they can actually take out the entire electric grid or an entire process of producing gasoline into the system. They can't take down all the pipelines, but they can certainly do a specific disruption in a certain area of the country.
Have we been able to determine the source for these attacks to this point? Are we looking at folks who are, terrorists in the strict sense of the word, or people who are just, mischief makers, people who just want to do it because they think it would be funny in their view to see something, get all messed up like this? I mean, what are you learning about these cyber attackers?
Yeah, it's hard to do the proper attrition to attribute this back to the source. What we are finding is that this is not the first time this has happened. Going back 5 or 6 years ago, even when we had the SQL slammer worm, it took out many oil and gas systems, and it was not written to attack the oil and gas infrastructure. It was actually written by a 17-year-old kid because he had a gripe against Microsoft and SQL Server. So the SQL slammer worm was not targeting oil and gas systems, but it had a very major impact on them. And we're seeing the difference. I think what we're seeing now is that instead of malware that is by mistake getting into process control systems and SCADA systems and critical infrastructure, these attacks now are being targeted into those systems, which is certainly quite different than we saw several years ago. Absolutely.
Well, it's all very scary. And as you put it, you really have to be very focused on alerting the public, raising awareness, getting to these companies and corporations, these private companies, to tell them that this is serious stuff and it can happen to them. It can bring down their whole system if they're not watching out. And we really appreciate your insights today, letting us know more about this. All right?
Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.